Elijah BrooksGrant pretends to be homeless and eats at his restaurant and ends up being racist. Today's story begins with a test no one saw coming. Elijah BrooksGrant, a celebrated restaurant mogul known for his passion for people and bold leadership, decided to step out of the spotlight and into the shadows. Dressed in tattered clothes, hidden behind a weathered hoodie and an old baseball cap, he walked into one of his own restaurants, not as the boss, but as a man down on his luck. What he discovered inside didn't just shake him. It shattered everything he believed his business stood for. Whispers, side eyes, quiet cruelty masked as customer service. And the worst part, it wasn't coming from strangers, but from the very people he had hired and trusted. But what happened next? No one, absolutely no one, was ready for. The bustling streets of downtown Miami never seemed to slow down, even in the late afternoon heat Shock's Kitchen. A trendy new restaurant chain that had quickly become a local favorite was buzzing with activity as the early dinner rush began. The aromas of sizzling dishes wafted out of the open kitchen, drawing customers in from the sidewalk. The ambiance was casual yet classy, designed to make guests feel at home while experiencing world-class flavors. Elijah BrooksGrant Shack, now a successful Mott Inn. The restaurant industry stood outside the restaurant, his towering figure, normally the center of attention, was hidden. Ryan Coopereth, a simple disguise today. He was not Elijah Brooks, Grantwill O'Neal, the basketball legend and owner of Shock's Kitchen. No, today he was just another customer, a regular guy looking to enjoy a meal. He wore a loose hoodie, faded jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. His face, usually recognizable by anyone who had followed his career, was hidden. Ryan Coopereth, the baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Shaw's decision to visit his restaurant in disguise had been a long time coming. As a businessman, he was always looking for ways to improve his establishments, but lately he had begun to wonder if his employees truly understood the values he had instilled in the company. Respect, hospitality, inequality were non-negotiables at Shaw's Kitchen. But Elijah BrooksGrant Shack needed to see for himself. If these values were being upheld by his staff, he pushed open the Dr. to Shaw Kitchen and stepped inside. The clattering of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air as he found a seat near the back of the restaurant. He kept his head down, choosing not to make eye contact with anyone, hoping to blend into the background. But he was keenly aware of the eyes that were subtly watching him from across the room. Employees observing a new customer. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper, two searers stationed near the counter, exchanged a quick look. Their gazes lingered on Elijah BrooksGrant for a moment too long, their eyes narrowing as they assessed him. The casual clothes, the unassuming demeanor. This man didn't look like he belonged in a place like Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen. They whispered to each other, barely audible above the hum of conversation. But Elijah BrooksGrant caught every word. "Are you sure he can afford to eat here?" Derek Shaw murmured, his tone laced with disdain. Ryan Cooper, who had been busy folding napkins behind the counter, rolled his eyes and leaned in closer. "Yeah, looks like he's one of those guys who's just scraping by," he said, his voice dripping with judgment. Elijah BrooksGrant didn't flinch. He had heard remarks like these before, but this time they were aimed at him in his disguise. He knew it was exactly what he needed to witness the true character of his employees when they thought no one was watching. After a moment, Ryan Cooper sighed and walked over to Shaw's table, his step slow and deliberate. He didn't greet the customer with a smile or a friendly introduction. Instead, he dropped a menu on the table with a little more force than necessary. "What can I get you?" he asked, his voice flat and unwelcoming. Elijah BrooksGrant looked up at Ryan Cooper, his expression calm, almost amused. "I'll have the shrimp pasta and a glass of water, please." Ryan Cooper didn't respond with the usual enthusiasm that Elijah BrooksGrant expected from his staff. Instead, he simply rolled his eyes again, walked back to the counter, and took his time entering the order into the system. It was clear that he wasn't in any rush to serve this average customer. As Elijah Brooks Grant sat there waiting, he overheard the snickers from the counter. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were whispering again, but this time the words were more malicious. "Betty's going to dine and dash, you know. Leave without paying." Derek Shaw said, his voice carrying just enough for Elijah Brooks Grant to hear. Ryan Cooper chuckled. "Yeah, probably spent his last few bucks. To eat here, he's probably looking for a free meal." The two laughed loudly, unaware of the fact that the man they were mocking was in fact the owner of the restaurant they worked for. Elijah Brooks. Grant took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. This was the kind of behavior that had no place in his restaurants, and he was about to make sure they knew it. Other customers were starting to notice the behavior, but were hesitant to intervene. Some looked uncomfortably toward Elijah Brooks Grant, sensing the tension in the air. But unsure how to address it, the room felt thick with an unspoken awareness that something wasn't right. But the silence was deafening. The meal finally arrived, and Elijah Brooks Grant graciously thanked the waitress Jasmine Reed, who had come to check on him. She seemed uncomfortable, her eyes darting from Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper to Elijah Brooks Grant. But she was quick to apologize for the delay. Her demeanor was kind and sincere, a stark contrast to the indifference of the two servers who had treated him with disdain as Elijah Brooks Grant ate. He continued to observe the way Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper interacted with other customers. He noticed that white customers were greeted with smiles, their orders taken promptly, and their needs attended to quickly. Meanwhile, customers of color like himself were often left waiting, their presence barely acknowledged. Shock's heart sank as he realized just how deep the issue ran. This wasn't just about poor customer service. It was about something far more sinister: the disrespect, the racism, the favoritism. It was all on display for him to see, and now he had to decide what to do about it. As Elijah Brooks Grant finished his meal, the last bite of shrimp pasta sliding easily down his throat, he couldn't help but feel a sense of growing disappointment. The restaurant he had spent years building, the one he had poured his heart into, seemed to be crumbling right before his eyes. The laughter from Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper still echoed in his mind, each mocking comment like a slap to his face. He had built Shaw's kitchen on respect, kindness, and a commitment to treating everyone, regardless of their background, with dignity. But here he was sitting in his own restaurant, seeing that those very principles were being trampled by the very people he trusted to uphold them. The ambiance of the restaurant seemed to blur around him, the chatter of other customers becoming a dull murmur as his thoughts raced. Elijah Brooks Grant had always prided himself on his leadership and the culture he had created in his businesses. But this was a reality check. If his employees were willing to treat customers this way, what else was happening behind closed doors? How many other times had this kind of behavior gone unchecked? His mind was made up. He was not going to let this slide. But before he could take action, Elijah Brooks Grant needed to test just how far this disrespect went, how deep it ran within his staff. He wasn't going to confront them without knowing the full extent of their behavior. He stood up from the table, his chair scraping across the floor louder than he had intended. Jasmine Reed, who had been busy with other tables, noticed the movement out of the corner of her eye and quickly made her way over to check on him. Her discomfort was palpable, and she shot a quick glance toward the counter where Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were still sneering at him. "Is everything okay, Jasmine Reed?" asked her voice, tentative but warm. Elijah Brooks Grant gave her a small smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Everything fine," he said calmly, his tone measured. He didn't want to alarm her, but he wanted to see how she would react in this situation. "You don't seem like you're in a rush." Elijah Brooks Grant continued, his gaze shifting towards Kyle and Ryan Cooper, who had begun talking loudly among themselves, clearly still laughing and whispering about him. "Are they always this slow with the orders?" Jasmine Reed hesitated, looking down at the table for a moment before meeting his gaze. She bit her lip, her discomfort growing. But then she nodded slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. They're not the best with customers. They can be rude sometimes, she confessed, her face reading in embarrassment, but it's hard to say anything. They're friends with the manager. Shock's heart sank at her words. This wasn't just a couple of bad apples, it was a systemic issue. He could feel the weight of the moment, pressing on him, knowing he couldn't let this kind of behavior continue, especially not in his restaurant. He leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. Jasmine Reed, I appreciate your honesty, Elijah BrooksGrant said, quietly, choosing his words carefully. But this isn't just about being rude. This is about respect. Every customer that walks through those doors deserves respect, whether they look like they have money or not. Jasmine Reed nodded again, her eyes welling up slightly, but she didn't speak. Elijah BrooksGrant understood the unspoken pain in her silence. She didn't want to be caught in the middle of a confrontation, but she knew as he did that something had to be done. Just as Elijah BrooksGrant was about to speak again, Kylan Ryan Cooper's loud laughter cut through the restaurant once more. This time, Elijah BrooksGrant heard them clearly. Did you see that guy's shoes? Derek Shaw said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I bet they cost less than the tip he left. Ryan Cooper snickered. Probably the only thing he owns that's worth anything. Shaw's jaw clenched at their words. But he didn't move from his seat. His patience was running thin, but he knew that if he made his move too early, it wouldn't have the desired impact. He had to wait for the right moment, and that moment was fast approaching without another word. Elijah BrooksGrant reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved with deliberate precision as he dialed a number that would change everything. He wasn't about to let Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper walk away from this without facing the consequences of their actions. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. Jasmine Reed, I'm going to need to speak to the manager. He said, a quiet authority in his tone. Please tell Tracy Collins I need to speak with her. Jasmine Reed looked startled for a moment, but she quickly nodded and rushed off to find the manager. Elijah BrooksGrant sat back, his eyes scanning the room, watching the employees work, as if everything was normal. He couldn't help but notice how different their behavior was when customers who appeared to be important entered the restaurant. It was a troubling realization. Was this how they treated everyone who didn't fit their mold of what a good customer looked like? Elijah BrooksGrant could feel the tension building in his chest, a mixture of anger and disappointment. He had worked hard to create a brand that people could trust, a place where everyone was treated with fairness and respect. But in this moment, it seemed like that ideal was being shattered by a few people who didn't share the same values. As he sat there waiting for Tracy Collins to arrive, he couldn't help but think about how much work it would take to fix this. It wasn't just about firing a couple of employees. It was about creating a culture where respect was the foundation. This had to be Elijah BrooksGrant than just this one incident. It had to be a lesson for everyone in the company. Tracy Collins arrived a few minutes later, her face a mix of concern and confusion as she looked at Elijah BrooksGrant, who was still sitting calmly at his table. She had no idea who he was, no clue that this was the very man who owned the restaurant. They were both standing in. Sir, is everything all right? Tracy Collins asked, her voice polite but unsure. Elijah BrooksGrant smiled inwardly, a smirk forming at the corner of his lips. He had been waiting for this moment, you could say that. But I think we need to have a little chat about how things are being run here. Tracy Collins's confusion deepened as she looked from Shaw to Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper, who were now staring nervously in their direction. Of course, Sir Tracy Collins said, her voice faltering. Let me just... No. Shaw interrupted, his voice cold and clear. I don't want to hear excuses. I want to talk to you about how your staff is treating customers, and I need to hear it from you, not them. The moment was about to shift. Elijah BrooksGrant was done being a silent observer. It was time for change, and it was going to start right here. The air in Shaq's kitchen grew thick with tension as Tracy Collins stood frozen in place, her confusion morphing into realization. She could feel the unease radiating from Elijah BrooksGrant, who was still seated calmly at the table. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper, standing behind the counter, were no longer laughing. Their faces had gone pale, their casual demeanor evaporating into one of nervousness and uncertainty. Shaw leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the two servers, who had been so openly respectful. He had heard enough. It was time for the moment of truth. He needed them to know just who they were dealing with and how their actions had betrayed the very values that Shaq's kitchen was supposed to represent. Tracy Collins, Shaq said, his voice low but deliberate. I think you need to understand something here. You're not just dealing with some anonymous customer, you're dealing with the owner of this restaurant, and that's something your employees seem to have forgotten. There was a long pause before Tracy Collins responded, her voice wavering slightly as she tried to process the situation. Wait, you're the owner. She stammered, disbelief and embarrassment mixing in her tone. Shaw nodded, the realization slowly sinking in for everyone present. The laughter that had echoed through the kitchen just moments before now seemed like a distant memory replaced by an uncomfortable silence that hung heavy in the room. At that moment, Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper knew their worst fears had come true. The man they had mocked, ridiculed, and disrespected wasn't some average customer. They had just alienated their boss, the one person whose respect and leadership they needed the most. The shock was evident on their faces as they exchanged worried glances, but neither of them dared to speak. They were now trapped in their own web of ignorance. Shaq stood up from his chair, his movements slow, but purposeful. He walked toward the counter, his towering presence casting a long shadow over the two young servers. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper, both visibly shaken, shifted nervously from one foot to the other, unsure of how to react. Elijah BrooksGrant stopped in front of them, his gaze unflinching. You know, Shaq, began his voice, steady and cold. I could have walked out of here forgotten about this whole thing. But what you did today wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern. I've been watching you, and I've been hearing things about how you treat our customers. You think I wouldn't notice. You think I wouldn't know what was going on behind in the scenes. Derek Shaw tried to muster up some courage, but his voice faltered. We didn't mean anything by it, man, he said weakly. It was just a joke. You know, we didn't a joke. Elijah BrooksGrant interrupted his voice, rising just enough to make Kyle and Ryan Cooper flinch. Let me make this clear, there's no such thing as a harmless joke when you're belittling people based on how they look or where they come from. That's not a joke. That's racism. The word hit hard, landing like a slap across the face. The room fell silent, the weight of Elijah BrooksGrant's words hanging in the air like a thick fog. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper looked at each other, but neither of them had anything to say. They both knew they had crossed a line that was unforgivable. I overheard everything you said. Elijah BrooksGrant continued, his gaze never leaving them every word. The way you talked about me, about the people who come into this restaurant, you didn't just disrespect me, you disrespected every single customer who walks through that door. Ryan Cooper, still trying to salvage the situation, stammered, Look, we didn't mean it that way, man. It's just, you know, some people don't belong in a place like this, right? Shaw's eyes narrowed even further. The casual tone that had once marked Ryan Cooper's speech now had a hard edge to it, a tone that left no doubt as to the deep-seated prejudices Ryan Cooper was trying to disguise with his words. Elijah BrooksGrant could feel the rage bubbling Ryan Cooper beneath the surface, but he controlled it with a steady calmness. You think people don't belong here because of how they look? Elijah BrooksGrant asked quietly, his voice like a knife cutting through the tension. Do you think your customers should be judged by the clothes they wear, the color of their skin, or the money in their wallets? Is that how we operate at Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen? Tracy Collins stood to the side, her eyes wide as the confrontation unfolded before her. She had never seen Elijah BrooksGrant like this. This was the kind of man who commanded respect, not just from his employees, but from the world at large. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, embarrassment flooding her as she realized just how deep the issues at Shaw's Kitchen ran. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were beginning to realize the gravity of the situation, the heat and shack, voice. The disappointment that laced every word was something neither of them had expected. They had underestimated him. They had taken his restaurant for granted, and now they were facing the consequences. "We were just trying to get through the day." Derek Shaw muttered, his eyes downcast. "We didn't think it was the Elijah BrooksGrant deal." Shaw's jaw clenched as he took a deep breath. He was done listening to their excuses. "A Elijah BrooksGrant deal?" He asked incredulously. "You think this is just a little issue? This isn't a Elijah BrooksGrant deal. This is the foundation of everything I stand for. You don't get to work here. If you can't respect the people we serve, every customer, no matter who they are, deserves to be treated with kindness and dignity." There was a long silence as the weight of Shaw's words settled in. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper exchanged glances, but neither of them had the courage to respond. They had crossed a line, and they knew it. The restaurant, their livelihood, and their reputation now hung in the balance. Elijah BrooksGrant turned towards Tracy Collins, who was still standing near the entrance to the kitchen. Tracy Collins. "Do you know what they were saying?" he asked, his voice steady but sharp. "Do you hear the things that were coming out of their mouths?" Tracy Collins swallowed hard, her eyes lowering as she nodded. "Yes, I overheard some of it, but I didn't know what to do. They've worked here for a while, and I didn't want to cause trouble." Shaw's eyes softened, though the disappointment still lingered in his gaze. "This isn't about causing trouble. Tracy Collins, this is about making sure we're doing the right thing. You can't let this kind of behavior slide." Tracy Collins nodded again. Now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, she was ashamed. But she knew that Elijah BrooksGrant was right. She had failed to address a problem that had been growing Ryan Cooper beneath the surface, but this wasn't the time for excuses. It was time to fix things. Elijah BrooksGrant turned. "Back to Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper, I'll tell you this once," he said, his voice cold and final. "This kind of behavior doesn't have a place here. You both need to understand that. And if you can't, then you're not welcome at Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen." The silence that followed was deafening, and the tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Shock's eyes were still fixed on Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper as they stood behind the counter, their shoulders stiff with anxiety. The room around them seemed to freeze, the usual hum of chatter and clinking silverware. Fading into the background, Tracy Collins stood to the side, her posture rigid as she waited for Elijah BrooksGrant to make his next move. But Elijah BrooksGrant wasn't quite ready to make a decision, yet he wasn't going to simply fire them or let them go without giving them a moment to reflect on their behavior. No, this wasn't just about them. It was about the entire culture at Shaw's Kitchen, the very essence of what he had worked so hard to build. He turned his gaze away from the two men and surveyed the rest of the room. His heart tightened as he took in the atmosphere. The restaurant was filled with people from all walks of life, just as it always had been. Some were in business suits, some in casual clothes, and some just passing through Miami on vacation. They all shared one thing in common. They were customers at Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen, and they all deserved the same level of service, regardless of their appearance or background. Yet Elijah BrooksGrant had to wonder how many of them had been treated differently, just like he had been. His eyes shifted to a family sitting at a table near the window. They were laughing and enjoying their meal. But Elijah BrooksGrant noticed that when they were greeted by the staff, it was with warmth and enthusiasm. The waitress had even asked if they needed anything else. Her voice sweet and inviting. Elijah BrooksGrant felt a flicker of frustration at the stark contrast between the way the family was treated and the way he had been treated just an hour ago. He thought back to the way Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper had mocked him. The insinuation that he couldn't afford to eat at his own restaurant. He continued his silent observation, and the more he watched, the clearer the problem became. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper had been dismissive and cold toward him. But it wasn't just him. Shaw noticed them acting the same way with a few other customers of color, customers who had been waiting a little too long, whose orders had been delayed, and whose interactions with the staff were far from warm. The issue in the room was palpable. Some customers were aware of the tension that had sparked between Elijah BrooksGrant and the servers, but most were too focused on their meals to take notice. Yet there were those who couldn't help but glance at the scene unfolding in front of them. They saw the way Elijah BrooksGrant was watching the staff, closely saw how Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were doing their best to avoid eye contact with him, and they wondered what was going on. They didn't know it, but they were about to witness a transformation, a shift in the restaurant's culture that would set the tone for years to come. Elijah Grant shifted his focus again, this time to Jasmine Reed. She was moving about the restaurant with ease, her smile genuine as she checked in with customers and ensured everything was running smoothly. Elijah BrooksGrant had noticed her earlier, how she had tried to fix things when she realized he was being treated unfairly. Unlike the other employees, Jasmine Reed was different. She didn't discriminate. She didn't judge customers based on their appearance. She treated everyone with the same of respect and courtesy, no matter who they were. Elijah BrooksGrant could see that Jasmine Reed had the potential to be a leader, someone who embodied the values that Shaq's Kitchen stood for. He caught her eye for a moment, and she seemed to hesitate before. Walking over to him, her face was still a little flushed, as if she was worried that she might be the next to face Elijah BrooksGrant's wrath. But Elijah BrooksGrant wasn't angry. Not at her. At least she had done the right thing by trying to make him feel welcome, by trying to smooth over the situation with Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper. Jasmine Reed, Elijah BrooksGrant, called softly, his voice calm but firm. She approached the table, her hands clasped together in front of her, clearly nervous but ready to hear whatever Elijah BrooksGrant had to say. Yes. Mr. O'Neill? She asked, her voice slightly trembling. Elijah BrooksGrant studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. He didn't want to come off as intimidating, but he needed her to understand the weight of the moment you've been watching, right? He asked. Jasmine Reed nodded quickly, her eyes flicking toward Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper before returning to Elijah BrooksGrant. Yes, sir, she said, her voice quiet. I've seen what's been happening, and I just want to say that I didn't. She trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. Elijah BrooksGrant raised a hand, silencing her. I know you didn't do anything wrong, you've been doing your job, but here's the thing. When you see something wrong, you have to speak up. You can't let it slide. You're part of this team, and your actions set the tone for everyone else. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. Do you understand, Jasmine? Reed nodded again, her eyes full of understanding and guilt. Do, Mr. O'Neill, I didn't know how to speak up, especially when it seemed like no one else was. Elijah Grant leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to carry the weight of this by yourself. But you can't stand by and watch this happen. We've built a place here that's based on respect for all people. You're the kind of employee I want in this company. Someone who cares about the customers, who treats everyone with kindness and dignity. That's the kind of leadership I'm looking for. Jasmine Reed's eyes brightened with a glimmer of hope. She hadn't expected Elijah BrooksGrant to say something like that, and the words seemed to inspire a newfound confidence in her. She straightened her back, a subtle but powerful shift in her demeanor. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, she said, her voice steady. Now, I'll do my best to make sure that everyone feels respected here. I'll help make sure things change. Shaw smiled at her, giving her a small nod. I know you will. I'm going to need people like you to help me clean up this mess. Jasmine Reed's smile grew wider. her sense of purpose solidifying in the wake of Shaw's encouragement as she walked away to check on another table. Elijah BrooksGrant couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. He had seen enough. He now had the pieces he needed to make things right. Shock stood up from the table, his gaze still fixed on Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper. The time had come for them to face the consequences of their actions he had seen. Enough of the disrespect he had watched, how they treated people. He had seen the way they interacted with people of color and how they ignored their basic responsibilities as employees. But most importantly, Elijah BrooksGrant had seen the potential in Jasmine Reed. She could be the change he needed, and he was going to make sure she had the tools to succeed. The tension in Shock's kitchen had reached a boiling point. Every movement seemed amplified. Every sound unnervingly clear. Shock could feel the weight of the moment. He had given his employees enough chances to correct their behavior, and now the time had come for him to make the necessary changes. The atmosphere had shifted from light and casual to one of palpable uncertainty. People were starting to notice. Customers glanced over nervously, unsure whether they should stay or leave, while the staff, who had once been carefree and friendly, now seemed anxious and on edge. Shaw stood still, in the middle of the restaurant, absorbing the silence. The familiar clatter of dishes and the soft hum of conversation had now faded into the background. He was calm, but his eyes, those eyes that had seen the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, burned with a quiet intensity. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about punishment. It was about setting things right, about reminding everyone, including himself, what Shaw's kitchen was built on. He turned to Jasmine Reed, who was still standing at the table where they had spoken. Moments ago, she was nervously cleaning the surface with a cloth, her hands slightly trembling. Elijah BrooksGrant gave her a reassuring nod, acknowledging her resolve. It was clear that Jasmine Reed was the kind of person he could count on to help lead the changes that were so desperately needed. He had seen her potential, and now he would see if she was ready for what was to come. "All right," Elijah BrooksGrant said, his voice cutting through the stillness of the room. "I'm going to speak to the manager now, and I'm going to speak to Kyle and Ryan Cooper." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air, "and this time, I'm not going to hold back." Jasmine Reed's eyes widened, her nerves rising once more, but she nodded quickly, her voice steady as she responded. "I'll be right here, Mr. O'Neill." Elijah BrooksGrant turned toward the back of the restaurant, where the kitchen doors swung open and closed, revealing glimpses of the staff busy at work. Tracy Collins had gone to check on something in the back, but Elijah BrooksGrant knew she would be back soon. He wanted this confrontation to be direct and clear, and he wanted Derek Shaw and B to fully understand the consequences of their actions. It was time for the truth to come out. He took a deep breath before stepping forward. He made his way to the counter, where Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were trying to avoid eye contact. Both of them were standing awkwardly, staring at the register as if the keys could somehow provide them with an escape. But Elijah BrooksGrant wasn't interested in their avoidance. He was here for something much Elijah BrooksGrantger than a moment of discomfort. Derek Shaw shifted his weight, his eyes darting to Elijah BrooksGrant, then quickly looking away. Ryan Cooper was fidgeting with a pen, tapping it nervously on the counter. They knew what was coming. They knew that the moment they had laughed at a man they didn't recognize, they had crossed a line that couldn't easily be undone, and now they would face the consequences. Derek Shaw, Ryan Cooper, Elijah. BrooksGrant's voice was low but firm, commanding attention. "I think it's time for you to understand something. I'm not angry, but I'm disappointed. And that's worse." Neither of them spoke. At first, Derek Shaw swallowed hard, as if the words were lodged in his throat. Ryan Cooper looked up briefly, but quickly dropped his gaze back to the pin in his hand. Shock's presence loomed over them both, his silence stretching the moment until they could no longer avoid the inevitable, "You too." Elijah BrooksGrant continued his tone, cutting through the awkwardness. "Thought you could get away with treating people like this? You thought you could mock customers, judge them based on their appearance or assumptions, and that it wouldn't matter. But I'm here to tell you, It matters. It matters a lot. Ryan Cooper opened his mouth to speak, but Elijah BrooksGrant held up a hand. Stopped him. No, I don't want to hear excuses. I've been watching you both for the past hour, and it's clear that this isn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern. I've seen the way you treat people of color. I've seen the way you treat anyone who doesn't fit your narrow view of who should be here. He paused, making sure they fully grasped the gravity of what he was saying. This isn't just about being rude. This isn't just about making jokes behind people's backs. This is about respect, and the lack of it. You've disrespected me. You've disrespected my restaurant, my staff, and most importantly, my customers. People come here to eat, too. Relax, to enjoy a good meal. They don't come here to be judged based on their skin color or their clothes. Shock's voice rose slightly, his anger now evident but controlled. And you want to know what the worst part is? You didn't even realize how wrong you were. You didn't even see it as a problem, and that's something I can't tolerate. We can't work together if you don't understand that. Derek Shaw opened his mouth again, but this time his voice cracked. I'm sorry we didn't. Elijah BrooksGrant interrupted. Him again? His voice sharp. Sorry doesn't fix this. You don't get to apologize and expect everything to be fine. That's not how this works. You've shown me that you don't share the values this company stands for. There was a long pause. Shock could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them, pressing down on the entire restaurant. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were now staring at the floor. Their faces pale. Shock knew that they understood the seriousness of the situation after a moment of silence. Elijah BrooksGrant finally spoke his voice. Resolute, you're both fired. Effective. Immediately. The words hung in the air, settling over Derek Shaunbin like a heavy fog. Derek Shaw looked up at Elijah BrooksGrant, his eyes wide with disbelief. Wait, what? You can't be serious. Elijah BrooksGrant's eyes met Derek Shaw's, and for the first time the young man saw the full force of Elijah BrooksGrant's authority. I am serious. You don't get to work here if you can't respect the people who come through that. Or you've proven that you don't understand what this restaurant is about, and I'm not going to tolerate it any longer. Ryan? Cooper didn't say anything. He was too stunned, too afraid to speak instead. He simply nodded. His shoulders slumped in resignation. Elijah BrooksGrant could see the regret in their eyes, but it didn't change the fact that their actions had consequences. As Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper stood silently, Elijah BrooksGrant turned his attention to Tracy Collins, who had entered the room, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had witnessed the whole exchange. And Elijah BrooksGrant could see the guilt in her eyes. I want you to take over their shifts. Elijah BrooksGrant said to Tracy Collins, his voice softer now. I'm promoting you to supervisor. You've earned it, and I need you to help me create a better culture here. One where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve. Tracy Collins's eyes widened in surprise, but she smiled, the weight lifting from her shoulders. Thank you, Mr. O'Neill, she said, her voice sincere. I'll do my best. Elijah BrooksGrant gave her a small nod, then turned toward the rest of the restaurant, addressing everyone. I want you all to know that this is just the beginning. Shaw's Kitchen is a place where everyone is welcome, no matter who they are or where they come from, and I'll make sure that we're always living up to that promise. The room was silent for a moment, but then there was a soft murmur of agreement. Elijah BrooksGrant felt a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew that this was the right step in creating a truly inclusive environment. The air in Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen was still thick with tension, but now there was an undercurrent of disbelief. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper stood stunned at the counter, their faces drained of color. They were like two boys caught doing something wrong, waiting for the punishment to land. Elijah BrooksGrant's decision was final, and the gravity of it was unmistakable. The entire restaurant had heard the exchange, and the heavy silence that followed echoed throughout the space. Tracy Collins stood quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she processed what had just unfolded. The words Elijah BrooksGrant had spoken were still sinking in. The two servers who had been so callous, so dismissive of people were gone, but there was no time to dwell on it. There was work to be done, and Shaw's eyes turned to her with a new sense of purpose as Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper gathered, their belongings in stunned silence. Tracy Collins stepped forward, her newfound responsibility settling on her shoulders. Elijah BrooksGrant had entrusted her with the role of supervisor, a promotion she never could have imagined. She felt the weight of it, but also a rush of adrenaline. This was her chance to prove that she could help make Shaw's Kitchen the place it was meant to be, a restaurant built on respect, equality, and true hospitality. Elijah BrooksGrant didn't take his eyes off the two men. As they stumbled toward the door, their heads down in shame. He had watched them from the moment they started working at Shaw's Kitchen. He had seen their arrogance, their inability to connect with customers, and most disturbingly, their lack of self-awareness. But what really irked him more than anything else was how they had underestimated the culture he had worked so hard to create. As they reached the door, Derek Shaw hesitated for a moment and then turned back. His voice was small, almost pleading. "You can't just fire us like this. We've been working here for months. You don't even know us." Elijah BrooksGrant's expression didn't change. He was calm, but his gaze was unwavering. "I don't need to know you. I've seen enough," he replied, his voice cool and firm. "Your actions speak for themselves." Ryan Cooper didn't say a word. His face was a mix of disbelief and shame, but he quickly followed Derek Shaw out the door. The moment they left, the restaurant seemed to exhale like a collective breath. Everyone had been holding in. Customers who had been watching the confrontation from their tables now started to murmur among themselves. Some exchanged looks of surprise, others of approval. No one had expected Elijah BrooksGrant to take such a bold stand, but now that it had happened, there was a sense of relief in the air. Elijah BrooksGrant turned to Tracy Collins. "It's up to you now," he said quietly, his voice more personal than before. "You've got the position, but with it comes a responsibility. You need to lead by example." Tracy Collins nodded, her heart racing with the weight of Elijah BrooksGrant's words. She had seen firsthand how important respect was in this business, and now she would have to help ensure that it wasn't just an idea, but a practice the ripple effect of Shaq's decision would shape. "The culture of Shaw's Kitchen from this day forward." "Don't worry, Mr. O'Neill," Tracy Collins said, with newfound confidence, her voice firm. "I'll make sure we get it right. I won't let you down." Elijah BrooksGrant nodded approvingly. "I know you won't. I'll check in with you later. Make sure the team knows about the changes." With that, Shaw turned to leave the restaurant, his presence still commanding the room. He walked with a purpose, knowing that this was just the beginning. The lesson had been delivered, and now the real work would begin. Work that would require the entire team to shift their mindset and embrace a culture of inclusion, empathy, and respect. As Elijah BrooksGrant stepped out into the warm Miami evening, he couldn't help but reflect on the decision he had just made. He knew it would be a difficult road ahead. Firing two employees, especially ones who had been with the restaurant for months, was never an easy choice. But it was necessary. There could be no compromise when it came to the values that Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen was built upon. The restaurant wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of who he was, and he would not let anyone tarnish that. As he drove home, the events of the day replayed in his mind. He thought about the way Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper had mocked him, assuming he was just another ordinary customer, the way they had disrespected the very people they were supposed to be serving. It was a stark reminder of how deeply ingrained biases could be and how quickly they could manifest in the workplace. But it also reminded him of something else: how important it was for leaders to step up and take action when necessary. It wasn't just about fixing a problem, it was about setting an example for others to follow. The next morning, Elijah BrooksGrant made the decision to address the entire staff. He didn't want the events of the previous day to hang over them, but he also didn't want them to forget what had happened. He wanted to understand that this was about more than just firing 2 people. It was about creating an environment where everyone was respected. Regardless of who they were or where they came from, it was about making sure that every customer felt welcome when they walked through those doors. By mid-morning, Elijah BrooksGrant was back at Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen. He walked into the restaurant with the same quiet confidence he had displayed the day before, but this time there was a different energy in the air. The employees were buzzing with anticipation, wondering what he had planned. They had all seen the fallout from the previous day's confrontation, and they knew that things were about to change. Elijah BrooksGrant gathered the staff together in the back of the restaurant, his presence immediately commanding attention. He could see the nervousness in their eyes, the unease lingering from the incident. But he wasn't here to lecture them. He was here to remind them why they worked at Shock's kitchen in the first place. "I want to be clear with all of you, Elijah BrooksGrant," began his voice steady. "Yesterday was a wake-up call we've got. Work to do. You all know the values this restaurant stands for: respect, kindness, hospitality. But that's not enough. If we don't live those values every day in every interaction, this isn't about a few bad apples. It's about creating a culture of respect, a culture where we honor our customers and each other." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "I don't expect perfection, but I do expect accountability. I expect you to treat every customer with the respect they deserve, no matter who they are or what. They look like that's non-negotiable." The room was silent as Elijah BrooksGrant's words echoed through the space. The employees were absorbing the message, feeling the weight of the responsibility they now carried. This was no longer just about serving food. It was about serving people with dignity. Elijah BrooksGrant turned to Tracy Collins, who was standing at the front of the room, her shoulders squared and her eyes focused. "Tracy Collins, you're in charge now. It's up to you to lead the team to make sure everyone is on the same page. I trust you." Tracy Collins met his gaze with a confident nod. "Thank you, Mr. O'Neill. I won't let you down." Elijah BrooksGrant smiled, his expression softening. "I know you won't. Now let's get to work. We've got a restaurant to run." As Elijah BrooksGrant walked out of the room, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had made the tough call, but it was the right one. Shock's Kitchen was on its way to becoming something even greater, and he knew that with the right leadership, it would be a place where everyone felt welcome, a place where respect wasn't just expected, but practiced every day. Shock stood in the center of the restaurant, his presence still commanding the room even as the morning rush began to wind down. His eyes were fixed on the 2 figures standing in front of him, Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper. Their faces were ashen, their expressions a mix of shame, regret, and confusion. Elijah BrooksGrant had never been one for theatrics, but the weight of the situation was undeniable. They had betrayed everything he had built in Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen. It was time to make them understand the full extent of their actions. Shock's voice was firm, but it carried a sense of disappointment that was deeper than any anger. He had seen too much of this behavior before, in places where people were judged by their appearance, their background, or their skin color. But this was his restaurant, and there would be no room for intolerance, no room for disrespect, not now, not ever. Derek Shaw, Ryan Cooper, Elijah BrooksGrant, began his voice, steady but unwavering. "I've given you both enough chances. I've watched you, and I've heard what's been happening behind the scenes. I've seen the way you treat people. And now, I need you to understand something. It's not just about how you treated me, it's about how you've treated every customer who has walked through those doors. It's about respect, and you've shown none." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Ryan Cooper fidgeted with his hands, nervously shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Derek Shaw didn't even dare to look Elijah BrooksGrant in the eye, his gaze fixed on the floor. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. The weight of his words hung over them both. You two have made it clear. Elijah Brooks Grant continued his voice, never wavering, that you don't understand what this place stands for. You've disrespected my business, my staff, and most importantly, my customers. People don't come here just to eat. They come here because they feel welcome, because they feel respected, and that's something you've taken for granted. Elijah Brooks Grant paused, his eyes narrowing as he let the gravity of his words settle in. He could feel the growing sense of discomfort in the room as KY and Ryan Cooper shifted under his gaze. Elijah Brooks Grant wasn't a man of subtlety when it came to doing what was right. There was no room for half measures. The fact that you thought it was okay to mock people, customers who pay good money to dine here, just shows how little you understand the core values of Shaw's Kitchen. You think it's funny to make jokes about someone's clothes, their shoes, their appearance. You think it's okay to treat people differently because they don't fit your narrow, biased view of who belongs here. Elijah Brooks Grant's voice rose slightly, each word carrying the weight of his frustration. That's not the kind of place I'm building. That's not what Elijah Brooks Grant's kitchen is about. I don't care who you are or where you come from. Everyone deserves respect. Derek Shaw's face flushed, and he opened his mouth as though he were going to speak, but Elijah Brooks Grant held up his hand, silencing him before he could utter a word. No, Derek Shaw, I don't want to hear excuses. I don't want to hear apologies. The damage is done. Elijah Brooks Grant said, "You've shown me who you are, and it's not the kind of person I want working for me. It's not the kind of person I want representing this restaurant." Ryan Cooper shifted uncomfortably. His shoulders hunched as though trying to make himself smaller. He opened his mouth, his voice cracking as he spoke. "We didn't mean it like that. We were just joking." Elijah Brooks Grant cut him off, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. "You were just joking." Shock's voice was ice cold. "Now, racism, discrimination, those aren't jokes, Ryan Cooper. Not when you're making assumptions about people based on the way they look or the way they dress. Those are biases, and you've let them infect how you treat people." Derek Shaw's face contorted as he finally looked up, locking eyes with Elijah Brooks. "Grant, we didn't mean any harm," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't like that. It was just." Elijah Brooks Grant's expression hardened. "It was like that. And it's unacceptable." His tone left no room for negotiation. "You think you can hide behind the excuse of, it was just a joke. But the fact is, you've shown a complete lack of respect for the people who make this restaurant run. Not just the customers, but the people who work here. You disrespected your co-workers, your manager, and your peers." The silence in the room was deafening. Elijah Brooks Grant let his words sink in. He wasn't giving them an out. This was about making a point not just to Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper, but to everyone who was listening, everyone who worked at Elijah Brooks Grant's kitchen, and everyone who dined there. Listen carefully. Elijah Brooks Grant said, his voice firm but calm. "You can't be part of a team if you can't respect the people around you. That's non-negotiable. You've made it clear that you don't share the values of this restaurant, and because of that, you're not welcome here anymore. I'm firing you both effective immediately." There was a stunned silence. Derek Shaw's face paled, and he seemed to freeze for a moment as though the words hadn't quite registered. Ryan Cooper's hands trembled as he stepped back as though trying to make himself invisible, but Elijah Brooks Grant wasn't done yet. Elijah Brooks Grant turned to Tracy Collins, who had been standing off to the side, quietly observing the exchange. "Letha, Elijah," Brooks Grant said, his tone shifting slightly. "I want you to make sure everything runs smoothly today. You're in charge. Now you've earned this. I'm promoting you to supervisor. I need you to help create the kind of environment we want here, a place of respect, kindness, and inclusion. You're the kind of employee I want at Elijah Brooks Grant's kitchen." Tracy Collins stood up straighter, her heart racing. She had always respected Elijah Brooks Grant, but now she felt a sense of responsibility that was heavier than she could have imagined. "Thank you, Mr. O'Neill," she said, her voice steady but filled with gratitude. "I'll do my best. I won't let you down." Elijah Brooks, Grant smiled, his expression softening just a little. I know you won't. Tracy Collins now. Let's get to work. We've got a restaurant to run with. That shock turned and walked toward the door, his steps purposeful as he exited he could. Feel the eyes of the staff on him, and he knew that things were about to change. This wasn't just a day of firing employees, it was a turning point. Shaw's Kitchen would be better for it, stronger for it. Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper were left standing in stunned silence, their fate sealed. There was no turning back now. Elijah BrooksGrant had made his stand, and they would have to live with the consequences of their actions. As Shock's footsteps echoed in the distance, Tracy Collins looked around at the rest of the staff. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but she also saw something else: determination. This was a moment that would shape the future of Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen, and Tracy Collins was ready to lead the way. The echo of Elijah BrooksGrant's footsteps as he left the restaurant lingered in the air, leaving a stillness that was almost suffocating. The staff, many of whom had witnessed the intense confrontation, were left standing in uneasy silence. No one spoke for several moments, as if the weight of Shaw's decision hung heavy in the air. But the calmness that followed his departure quickly gave way to action. Tracy Collins, now promoted to supervisor, knew that she couldn't afford to let this moment slip away. Shock had put his trust in her, and she was determined to live up to his expectations. All right. Everyone gather around, Tracy Collins said, her voice steady as she looked around the restaurant. Her heart was racing, but she knew this was her time. She was ready for this challenge. The staff, still in shock from what had just transpired, quickly gathered near the back of the restaurant. Tracy Collins stood at the front, her shoulders squared, a sense of calm. Authority in her demeanor. Shock's decision to promote her had solidified her position as the leader of the team, and she felt the weight of that responsibility with every word she spoke. I know the past hour has been intense. Tracy Collins began, her voice carrying through the quiet room. But it's important that we understand what just happened and why Elijah BrooksGrant made a decision that may have been tough. But it was the right one. We can't have people working here who don't understand what this place is about. Respect, kindness, integrity. Those are the values Shock's Kitchen is built on, and we will make sure that they are lived every single day in every interaction with every customer. The staff listened, some nodding, others standing still as they absorbed her words. Tracy Collins could sense the mixed emotions in the room. Some were relieved, some were anxious, but all were uncertain about what would come next. She needed to be the one to reassure them that this was a new beginning, that Shaq's decision wasn't just a reaction to a few bad moments, but a commitment to creating a culture where every employee could thrive. I want you all to understand something, Tracy Collins continued. We are a team, and as a team, we succeed or fail together. What happened with Derek Shaw and B wasn't just about those two. It's about all of us. It's about the environment we create here. If one person isn't pulling their weight, or if one person is bringing negativity into the space, it affects everyone. She paused, letting her words sink in. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. This was the turning point. This was where the culture would shift. We are going to take immediate action to ensure that this never happens again. Tracy Collins said, her voice firm, now filled with the authority of the position she had just stepped into. We will have mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, effective immediately. It's time to make sure that we are not just treating people well, because we treat them well, because it's the right thing to do. And I'm going to make sure we're all held accountable. Some staff members exchanged glances, unsure of what the new regime would look like, but they trusted Tracy Collins. They knew her well enough to know she was capable of guiding them through this. Tracy Collins took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure despite the nerves that still lingered in her chest. She had seen the best in Elijah BrooksGrant. She had watched him lead by example, always calm under pressure, always fair. Now it was her turn to do the same from now on. We will also be implementing a secret shopper program. Tracy Collins continued, her voice gaining confidence as she went on. I'll be making surprise visits, and there will be others as well. We want to make sure that we are upholding the values we stand for. If any behavior like what we saw with Derek Shaw and Ryan Cooper ever happens again, there will be consequences. We're a family here. But this is also a business, and we have a responsibility to our customers. We won't tolerate anything less than the best from ourselves. A murmur went through the group, a mixture of surprise and understanding. The secret shopper program was a bold move, one that would keep everyone on their toes and ensure accountability. It was clear that Tracy Collins was ready to bring the change Elijah BrooksGrant wanted, and she wasn't backing down. Tracy Collins scanned the faces of her team, her eyes settling on a few of the newer staff members who looked both curious and apprehensive. She knew it would take time for everyone to adjust to the new expectations, but she had no doubt that they would rise to the challenge. This wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about creating a space where people felt valued, where they knew that their hard work and dedication were seen and appreciated to help with this transition. "We be offering a series of workshops," Tracy Collins said, "not just about diversity and inclusion, but about leadership, customer service, and teamwork. Everyone here has the potential to grow, I know that, and if you're willing to put in the effort, you'll be given every opportunity to do so." She paused again, letting the message settle. She could feel the shift happening in the room. The mood was changing from one of uncertainty to one of hope. This was the start of something new, and they were all going to be a part of it. One of the servers, a young woman named Nina Alvarez, raised her hand. "Tracy Collins," she began, her voice tentative. "How do we make sure that we're holding each other accountable? I mean, what happens if someone is still acting like Ryan Cooper and Derek Shaw?" Tracy Collins smiled, appreciating the question. It was an important one. "We have to be proactive," she said. "It's not just about waiting for the next situation to happen. It's about speaking up when we see something that doesn't align with our values. We're a team, and teams support each other. If you see something that doesn't feel right, you need to say something. If someone's acting out of line, we address it right away, but we do it with respect. This isn't about pointing fingers, it's about growth together." The group nodded in agreement. Tracy Collins could see the resolve in their eyes, the determination to be a part of something Elijah BrooksGrant than just another job. This was a turning point, and they were all going to be part of it with that. Tracy Collins dismissed the team, urging them to get back to work, but with a renewed sense of purpose. As the staff returned to their stations, she took a moment to reflect on what had just transpired. She had made a commitment to Elijah BrooksGrant and to herself that she would uphold the values of Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen. She was determined to create a culture where every employee felt seen, heard, and valued, and she was ready to take action to ensure that would happen. The restaurant was quiet now, the bustle of the kitchen continuing in the background. Tracy Collins stood in the center of the room, looking around at the faces of the people she now led. There was work to do, but she felt a sense of hope. Hope that things would change and that Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen would truly live up to its name. The days following the changes at Shaw's kitchen were filled with a palpable sense of anticipation as the dust settled from the dramatic firing of Kylan Ryan Cooper, and the staff adjusted to Tracy Collins's new role as supervisor. Something began to shift in the restaurant. The employees had been given a clear message. There would be no tolerance for disrespect, no compromise when it came to the core values that Elijah BrooksGrant had spent years cultivating. The culture of Shaq's Kitchen was undergoing a transformation, and the ripple effect was undeniable. The mandatory diversity and inclusion training began immediately, with a team gathering in a small meeting room every week for group discussions and workshops. These sessions were led by an external doctor, Renee Morgan, an expert in workplace diversity who guided the team through various topics such as unconscious bias, microaggressions, and cultural sensitivity. At first, the staff seemed uncertain about the process. There were some uncomfortable moments, but gradually the atmosphere began to change. Employees who had once been passive in their approach to diversity were now actively engaged in the discussions, eager to learn and understand how they could make Shock's Kitchen a place that truly embraced everyone, no matter their background. The Secret Shopper program was rolled out shortly thereafter. Tracy Collins, still settling into her new leadership role, was both excited and nervous about the implementation as part of the program. Surprise visits were made to the restaurant by mystery diners who reported back to Tracy Collins about their experiences. It was a critical part of the overhaul, ensuring that the staff was living up to the values Elijah BrooksGrant had set forth at first. There were some growing pains. A few employees were caught off guard by the increased scrutiny, but the feedback they received from the mystery shoppers was invaluable. There were moments of realization, moments when staff members realized that what they thought were harmless comments or jokes could be perceived in a completely different light by someone else, and slowly the team began to adapt. They became more conscious of their behavior, more aware of how they interacted with customers, and more invested in making the restaurant welcoming space for everyone. One of the most striking changes came from the customers themselves. Word quickly spread about the changes taking place at Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen, and it wasn't long before customers began to notice a difference. Regulars who had once felt the subtle tension in the air started commenting on the new energy in the restaurant. The service was faster, more attentive, and the smiles from the staff felt more genuine. But what struck Elijah BrooksGrant most was the increased diversity in the customer base. People of all races, backgrounds, and walks of life were flocking to the restaurant, eager to experience the shift firsthand. One afternoon, Shock made an unannounced visit to the restaurant. He had been closely monitoring the changes through Tracy Collins and the reports from the Secret Shopper program, but he wanted to see it for himself as he stepped through the door. The familiar scent of sizzling food greeted him, but something else was different. There was a warmth in the air, a sense of comfort and inclusion that hadn't been there before. Shahmaid made his way to a table near the back of the restaurant, and to his surprise, no one recognized him. He was just another customer blending into the background. He watched as the staff interacted with the customers, observing the new atmosphere. Firsthand, Tracy Collins was busy at the counter, smiling and engaging with customers, making sure everything was running smoothly. Elijah BrooksGrant felt a swell of pride as he realized that this was the future of Shaw's Kitchen, a restaurant where everyone from the staff to the customers felt truly respected. A few minutes into his meal, Shock overheard a conversation from a table nearby. A couple of women, both in their mid-30s, were chatting about their experience at Shock's Kitchen. One of them, a black woman with curly hair, leaned in toward her friend. "I'm telling you, this place is different now," she said with a smile. "I've been coming here for months, and it always felt a little off, like you could tell the staff was, well, not always welcoming, but today it feels like they really care. It's like the energy is totally changed." Her friend, a Hispanic woman with a bright smile, nodded in agreement. "I know exactly what you mean. I've noticed it too. They're so much friendlier now, and they actually make an effort to remember your name. It's like they're taking pride in their work. I haven't seen that here before." Shock's heart swelled with pride as he listened to the women's conversation. This was the change he had been working for, the transformation that had started with a difficult decision, but had led to something much. Elijah BrooksGrant Shock's Kitchen was no longer just a restaurant. It was a place where respect and inclusivity were at the forefront of everything they did. It wasn't just about serving food, it was about serving people with dignity. The next morning, Elijah BrooksGrant met with Tracy Collins in her office. The atmosphere between them had changed as well. What had once been a professional relationship was now one built on mutual respect and understanding. Tracy Collins had stepped into her new role with confidence, and Elijah BrooksGrant had watched her grow as a leader. He was proud of what she had accomplished, but there was still more work to be done. Tracy Collins. "I've been hearing great things," Elijah BrooksGrant said with a smile as he sat down at her desk. The staff is really embracing the changes, and the customers are noticing, but I need you to keep pushing. We've made a lot of progress, but this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. Tracy Collins nodded, a determined look in her eyes. I know, Mr. O'Neill, I'm going to make sure that we continue to improve, that we keep setting the standard for inclusivity in the restaurant industry. I won't let up. Elijah BrooksGrant smiled again. I believe in you, Tracy Collins. You've got this, and don't forget we've got a responsibility to make sure this culture of respect extends. Beyond just this restaurant, we need to make sure our staff feels supported and appreciated. We need to show them that this isn't just a job, it's a community. Tracy Collins's face lit up with the fire of a leader ready to take on the challenge. Absolutely. I'll make sure we keep pushing the envelope. We won't stop until every single person who walks into Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen feels valued and respected. Elijah BrooksGrant stood up, giving her a small nod of approval. That's what I like to hear. Keep up the great work. Tracy Collins, I'm proud of what you've done here. As Elijah BrooksGrant left the restaurant, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen was no longer just a business. It was a place where people could come together, enjoy a great meal, and feel seen and valued. Shah knew that this was the legacy he wanted to leave behind, and it was just getting started. Weeks passed, and the transformation at Shah's kitchen became more than just a memory. It became a new reality. The restaurant, once just a place to grab a meal, had blossomed into something much more meaningful. A hub where people from all walks of life could come together, break bread, and experience something deeper than just the food. There was a palpable energy in the air, a sense of belonging and warmth that hadn't been there before. Shah's kitchen was no longer just about serving good food. It was about serving people with integrity, kindness, and respect. Shah's visit a few weeks earlier had been an important turning point, but now he was coming back, this time not in disguise, but as the owner who had put his faith in his team to bring the restaurant back to its core values. He had been watching the improvements from a distance through reports from Tracy Collins' customer feedback and the success of the Secret Shopper program. The results were undeniable. Elijah BrooksGrant kitchen was thriving, and the staff was living up to the new culture of inclusivity and respect. Elijah BrooksGrant stepped into the restaurant with a sense of pride that was more profound than he could have imagined. The moment he walked through the door, he was greeted by the familiar buzz of conversation and the comforting smells of freshly prepared food. But this time, the atmosphere felt different. There was no tension, no underlying unease. The staff moved efficiently, but they did so with genuine smiles and the kind of warmth that made Shah feel like part of the family. This was the Shah's kitchen. He had always envisioned a place where everyone, no matter their background or appearance, was treated with dignity. Tracy Collins, now comfortably in her role as supervisor, was at the front checking in with customers and overseeing the flow of the restaurant. Elijah BrooksGrant could see the confidence in her step, the way she interacted with the staff, encouraging them with a quiet, firm leadership that reflected everything Elijah BrooksGrant had hoped for when he had promoted her. She saw him and immediately came over, her smile wide and genuine. "Mr. O'Neill," Tracy Collins said, extending her hand. "It's good to see you again. I'm glad you're here." Elijah BrooksGrant returned the smile, shaking her hand. "Tracy Collins, you're doing an incredible job. I can see the difference. You've really stepped up." Tracy Collins's face flushed slightly, but she beamed with pride. "Thank you. We've all been working really hard to make sure that the changes stick. It's been a process, but it's been worth it. The team is behind the mission now, and it shows." Elijah BrooksGrant nodded, his eyes scanning the room, watching as the staff worked together smoothly with the kind of synergy that could only come from a team that genuinely cared for each other and their customers. It was clear that the new values had permeated every aspect of the restaurant. As Elijah BrooksGrant made his way through the restaurant, he couldn't help but notice the diverse range of customers sitting at the tables: families, business people, tourists, and locals alike. all enjoying their meals and chatting them amongst themselves. The restaurant was no longer just a place for the affluent or the trendy. It was a place for everyone, and it wasn't just the diversity and the customers that caught his eye. It was the way the staff interacted with them. Each customer, regardless of how they looked or where they came from, was treated with the same level of care and attention. The warmth was genuine. Shock's eyes lingered on one particular table where a group of elderly women sat chatting and laughing. The server, a young man named Elijah Brooks, was refilling their water glasses and asking if they needed anything else. The exchange was so natural, so comfortable, that Elijah BrooksGrant couldn't help but smile. He could see the difference in the way the staff carried themselves. Now they weren't just doing their jobs. They were making people feel welcome. It wasn't about the money or the tips anymore. It was about creating an experience. Elijah BrooksGrant sat down at his usual spot in the corner where he could watch the room and take in the atmosphere. Tracy Collins joined him a few moments later, bringing over a cup of coffee. She sat across from him, looking both pleased and still determined. "We've been getting a lot of positive feedback." Tracy Collins said, her voice quiet but confident. "The customers are noticing the changes, and we've seen a noticeable increase in repeat business. People are telling their friends about the new vibe here, and we're getting more diverse groups coming in. It's really exciting." Elijah BrooksGrant nodded thoughtfully, savoring the warmth of the coffee. He had always believed that a business could only succeed when it treated its customers with respect. He had built Shock's Kitchen on that very principle, but it wasn't until he took that step, firing employees who didn't share those values, that he truly understood how crucial it was to lead by example. The transformation wasn't just about creating a more inclusive environment for the customers. It was about creating a space where his staff could thrive, where they felt supported, and where their values aligned with the mission of the restaurant. Tracy Collins, "I've been watching from the sidelines, and I have to say I'm impressed." Elijah BrooksGrant said, his voice filled with pride. "This is exactly what I wanted. You've created a culture here where respect is the foundation, and it shows not just in the way the customers feel, but in the way the staff works together. You've done a great job." Tracy Collins smiled, her pride evident. "I couldn't have done it without the team. Everyone's really stepped up, and we've made sure to keep the lines of communication open. Everyone knows that if they see something that doesn't align with our values, we address it immediately, and the Secret Shopper program has been a huge help in keeping everyone on their toes." Elijah BrooksGrant nodded, impressed. "I'm glad the Secret Shopper program is working. It's important to keep up the momentum, but this right here is what I'm most proud of. The way you've created an environment where people feel safe, where they feel respected. That's something we can build on." The conversation shifted toward future plans, and Tracy Collins began discussing ideas for new training initiatives and how they could continue to push the boundaries of customer service excellence. But Shock's mind kept returning to the Elijah BrooksGrant picture, the cultural shift that had occurred, the lesson that had been learned as the afternoon wore on. Shock spent more time observing the restaurant and the staff. It was clear that Shaw's Kitchen had not only survived the challenges, but had come out stronger. The change wasn't just skin deep, it was embedded in the very DNA of the restaurant. Every employee, from the kitchen staff to the front-of-house team, understood that their actions had an impact. And they now understood the importance of leading with respect, kindness, and authenticity. As prepared to leave, he stood up and gave Tracy Collins a final nod of approval. "Keep pushing, Tracy Collins. Keep leading by example. You've created something incredible here. Let's make sure we keep setting that standard." Tracy Collins nodded with determination. "We will. Mr. O'Neill, we won't stop." Elijah BrooksGrant stepped out of Elijah BrooksGrant's kitchen, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't anticipated. When he first started his journey as a restaurator, he had faced challenges, made tough decisions, and had seen the impact of those decisions ripple out, transforming not just his business but his entire team. This wasn't just a success story for Elijah Brooks Grant. It was a success story for the entire restaurant industry. Elijah Brooks Grant's kitchen had set a new standard, and the ripple effect was only just beginning. Sometimes it takes a disguise to reveal the truth. Elijah Brooks Grant walked into his own restaurant expecting to observe service standards. Instead, he uncovered something far more troubling, a quiet prejudice that had gone unchecked beneath polished smiles and crisp uniforms. But he didn't walk away. He stood up, and by doing so reminded us all that true leadership isn't about power, it's about accountability, courage, and compassion. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about food or profit, it's about how we treat one another when we think no one's watching. Some may say he overreacted. Others might wonder if the problem was really that deep. But here at Soulful Stories 4, we believe silence in the face of disrespect speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. Now we turn the question to you. Have you ever been judged before anyone knew your story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We truly want to hear from you. If this story moved, you touched a nerve, or opened your eyes, please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Stories I4, where we bring light to the truths most people leave in the dark. Let's keep the conversation going.